I'm Margaret Winslow. I'm 67 years old. A widow. And I used to run a small catering business with my husband, Henry. He passed away 6 years ago. And since then, it's just been me and this house we built together. I have one child, a son named Nathan. He's married now to Jessica, a woman I once believed was steady and kind. For a while, I thought we were the kind of family that stuck together, even if we didn't always understand one another. I'm not the type to exaggerate, and I never imagined I'd end up saying this out loud. But I had to pretend I was losing my mind to survive. Not in some metaphorical way. I mean actually staging confusion, slipping up on names, letting them think I was fading. And the hardest part is, I did it to protect myself from the very people I once held closest. I'm not telling this story for sympathy. I'm telling it because I know I'm not the only one. Maybe you've been through something like this. Or maybe you felt it coming and didn't know what to call it. What happened to me didn't show up all at once. And it didn't look like evil. It looked like help, concern, family. But the truth had teeth. So if you're here listening, thank you. It means more than I can say. And if any part of this sounds familiar, I hope you'll stay a while. I think we need to talk. My flight out of Chicago was canceled because of bad weather. The airline offered to put me up in a hotel. But something in me didn't want to wait around. It was Friday afternoon. And I thought maybe I could turn it into a sweet little surprise. Nathan and Jessica were staying at the house while their kitchen was being redone. They'd asked if they could use the place for a couple weeks. Said it would give them some breathing room. I didn't mind. I figured it might be nice for them to enjoy the garden. Maybe cook a few meals together without construction dust in their food. As the cab pulled into the driveway, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a while. The idea of catching them off guard, seeing their faces light up, made me smile. I stepped out with my suitcase, still wearing the coat I'd flown in, and took the familiar walk to the front steps. Everything looked just the way I'd left it. Except quieter. I was reaching into my coat pocket for the spare key when I heard something. The kitchen window above the sink was open just enough to let the breeze carry voices outside. At first, I didn't pay attention. It sounded like Jessica. Her tone was calm, almost cheerful, like she was reading off a grocery list. Then I heard the words, "I've already started putting the drops in her drinks." I didn't move. My fingers curled around the key, but I couldn't feel it. My breath stopped in my chest. My feet were rooted to the porch, like I had forgotten how to lift them. Inside, I heard Nathan's voice. Quiet, hesitant. Then Jessica again. She sounded so collected, so matter-of-fact, explaining something about symptoms, about needing documentation, guardianship. That word landed like ice on my spine. I was no longer part of that conversation. I was the subject of it. I stood there, letting the drizzle cling to my coat. In that moment, something inside me turned. I didn't walk away. I didn't knock. I slid the key into the door like nothing had happened, stepped into my house with a practiced smile, and greeted them as if I hadn't heard a thing. They weren't expecting me. I could see it in the way Jessica froze, how Nathan's mouth moved before any words came out. But I was already performing, and from that moment on, I knew I had to play the part better than they ever expected. Jessica came toward me with open arms like everything was fine. Her smile looked just a bit too bright, like it had been painted on in a rush. I leaned into her hug, felt her perfume brush against my neck, and for the first time, noticed how strange it felt to embrace someone who had just calmly discussed drugging me. Nathan mumbled something about the weather. I nodded, dropped my keys in the bowl like always, and wheeled my suitcase gently across the floor. It was muscle memory. All of it. But underneath the surface, everything had shifted. Dinner was already cooking. I could smell rosemary and garlic. Their usual comfort recipe when they wanted something from me. Jessica asked how the flight was. If I was tired, then offered me a glass of warm milk. She said it would help after all that travel. The glass was smooth and slightly too warm in my hand. I took a small sip and let the taste rest on my tongue. There was a hint of something floral. Not unpleasant. Just unfamiliar. I smiled softly and thanked her. My voice stayed steady. But my mind was already separating from the moment. Pulling away from the kitchen. The food. The lies. I looked over at Nathan. And for a brief second, I wondered if he felt any of this. At the table, I answered their questions slowly, letting my words wander a little. I mentioned a neighbor when I meant to say the cats. I trailed off once in the middle of a sentence. Then looked around like I was trying to remember where I was. Their eyes flicked to each other. Quick. Subtle. Like they were checking a shared note. That's when I knew it would work. They wanted to believe I was fading. They needed it to be true. I excused myself after dinner and unpacked slowly, folding every item like it mattered. I stared at my reflection in the mirror for a long time. I didn't look different. But something inside me had hardened. Later, Jessica brought a small tray of cookies and tea into the living room. She said I should rest, and that they'd help around the house while I got settled again. I smiled and said that was kind of them. She left the cup on the end table. Untouched. This house didn't feel like mine anymore. And I wasn't the woman they remembered. Not the one who made Sunday lunches or paid off Nathan's tuition without being asked. That version of me was gone. I sat in the quiet and let the performance settle in. This wasn't fear anymore. It was focus. Every word I spoke from then on, every pause, every confused glance, was part of something bigger. They thought they were watching me unravel. What they didn't know was that I was watching them, too. And I had just taken my place on the stage. By the next morning, I had already decided how the rest of the week would look. I moved slower, dragging my feet just enough to make a sound against the kitchen tile. When Jessica offered help with the kettle, I waved her off but fumbled the lid, letting it clatter on the counter, like my hands weren't quite sure anymore. I asked her twice if I had taken my blood pressure pills, even though I hadn't taken them at all. She smiled, told me I had. And I nodded like I was unsure, but willing to believe her. That small exchange told me everything I needed to know. Later that day, I set a fake calendar alert on my phone and left it face up on the hallway table. It buzzed right on time with a made-up neurology appointment. When I returned from the garden, the phone was exactly where I'd left it. But the alert had disappeared. I smiled quietly to myself. Jessica was already curating what I saw and what I remembered. It didn't take long for them to lean into it. At dinner, I said the cat had been hiding all day, even though we hadn't had one in over a year. Nathan blinked, hesitated, then changed the subject. Jessica gave me a long look, the kind that felt like she was measuring me rather than listening. I called her Julia once when I asked for the salt. She didn't correct me. She just glanced at Nathan. And he looked away. That night, I slipped a small recorder beneath the cushion of my reading chair and let it run while I dozed off with the television on low. They thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I heard Nathan whisper that I was slipping faster than he expected. Jessica agreed. Said the doctor would back them up if they got the paperwork ready. Their voices were hushed, but steady, like they were arranging a carpool rather than a betrayal. The next morning, I poured orange juice into my coffee and didn't notice until Jessica pointed it out. I apologized. Confused. Then sat at the table with mismatched socks and hummed an off-key lullaby under my breath. The more I leaned in, the more they believed. They offered to handle the groceries, the bills, even the thermostat. I acted grateful. I smiled a little too long, nodded a little too slowly, and made sure my gaze drifted just past them when they spoke. In the sunroom, I watched Jessica talk on the phone in a voice too low to be casual. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught phrases. Something about a form, a signature, a doctor. My name wasn't said, but I didn't need it to be. Each night, I labeled a new envelope. Inside, I placed sticky notes with everything I overheard. I included names, times, strange behaviors, and odd comments. The recorder was backed up to a flash drive, hidden behind the lining of my old suitcase. They thought they were building a case. So was I. By the end of the week, Jessica had begun reminding me to lock the doors, double-check the stove, and take my vitamins. Her voice was sweet, but it pressed down like a hand on my shoulder. I let her. Every mistake I made was rehearsed. Every pause was intentional. I let them think they were in control, while I sat in the very center of their web, holding the first thread. I started keeping everything in a plain shoebox I found in the back of my closet. It had once held gardening gloves and seed packets, but now it held sticky notes, printed emails, and audio clips copied to a flash drive. Each envelope was labeled by date, tucked neatly into rows like patient little witnesses. Every evening after dinner, I added something new. A note about Jessica's tone, a phrase Nathan repeated that didn't sit right. Sometimes just a glance they exchanged that told me more than any sentence could. The recorder stayed hidden under my chair cushion, and I rotated its location just in case. I used the old kitchen timer as an excuse to check on the living room, resetting it with fake reminders while making sure the device kept working. It became routine, like brushing my teeth, except it had the weight of survival. After 2 weeks, I called Linda. She was one of the few people I trusted who still lived nearby. We hadn't spoken in years, but she answered on the second ring like no time had passed. I kept my voice low, steady, and told her just enough to make her pause. We met at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town. Linda had worked with elder advocacy groups for decades. She knew the systems, the loopholes, the patterns. I slid a folder across the table, filled with copies of emails and a partial transcript from one of the recordings. She listened without interrupting, flipping each page carefully, like she was holding something fragile. When she looked up, her face told me she believed every word, and that she was already thinking 2 steps ahead. We made a plan. Quiet. Legal. Precise. I removed the original trust documents from the file drawer in my home office and took them straight to my bank. My medical power of attorney was updated and placed in a safe deposit box under my name only. The new paperwork named an outside trustee, someone Nathan and Jessica didn't know existed. I met with Cheryl Kim, the financial advisor Henry and I had worked with for over 20 years. She still remembered the notes he'd written in the margins of our retirement folder. I brought her the revised documents and asked for confirmation that Nathan's name had been removed entirely. She nodded, then flagged the account for withdrawal alerts and placed an internal freeze on large transfers pending my written consent. Nothing about this felt dramatic. It felt necessary. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just signatures and steady hands. Back at home, I repacked the shoebox, added a new set of labeled envelopes, and taped a small note inside the lid. If anything happens to me suddenly, please read everything before making a decision. I placed it at the very top. I wasn't operating from fear anymore. I was operating from clarity. Each action I took was a way of reclaiming something that had slowly been slipping away without me noticing. They wanted to turn me into a version of myself that no longer had a voice. But I hadn't forgotten how to speak. I was just choosing when. And soon, When I did, it would be with everything I needed already in place. It was early, just after sunrise. When I found Nathan sitting alone on the back porch, he had a mug of coffee resting in his hands. But he wasn't drinking it. His eyes were fixed on the far edge of the yard, like he was waiting for something that wouldn't come. I stepped out with a blanket around my shoulders and sat across from him. The breeze was soft, rustling the maple leaves overhead. For a long time, neither of us said a word. "Your father used to sit right here every morning." I said it gently, more to the air than to him. He always liked the birds better than the news. Nathan didn't laugh, but his mouth pulled into something close. He said Dad never really saw him, never called him smart, never gave him much space to fail. When he dropped out of school, there hadn't been a fight, just that heavy kind of silence, the kind that fills a room and never quite leaves. I listened, not just to the words, but to the ache behind them. The way his voice cracked a little when he said he felt like a guest at his own father's funeral. The way his fingers tightened around the handle of that cold cup. I told him I remembered, that I saw it. Even if I didn't say so then. That grief looks different on everyone. And sometimes silence isn't peace. It's just pressure in a cuter form. He nodded. I still forward. He said he always felt like I held everything together while he barely held himself up. That it made him feel invisible in his own family. That maybe Jessica made him feel needed in a way he didn't get from us. I reached out and placed my hand over his. His shoulders relaxed. But not all the way. There was something soft in his eyes. But there was also something gone. I knew that look. I had worn it myself. I told him it wasn't too late to be something different. That he didn't have to carry his father's silence or my steadiness like weights he didn't choose. He blinked hard and looked at me like he wanted to believe it. But deep down, I also knew what he had done, what he had agreed to. Understanding him didn't mean forgetting what he let happen. It didn't mean letting go of what he tried to take. When I stood to go back inside, I leaned down and kissed the top of his head like I used to. He didn't stop me. But he didn't follow either. Behind the closed door of my room, I wrote down everything he said. Every word he used to explain away the parts of himself he didn't want to carry. Because I could love my son. But I couldn't ignore what he had become. Not anymore. By the time the week ended, I knew I couldn't keep everything inside the house. It was time to move beyond notes and whispers. I needed safeguards that couldn't be erased with a misplaced pill bottle or a scribbled doctor's note. I called Cheryl Kim, the financial advisor Henry and I had trusted for over 2 decades. She cleared her schedule the next morning, and I met her in the small, second-floor office that still smelled faintly like lavender and old coffee. She greeted me with the same calm eyes she had at Henry's memorial. Steady and kind without pity. I laid out the documents I'd collected. The revised trust, notarized months ago. Naming a neutral third party as executor. The medical power of attorney, redirected from Nathan to our longtime legal contact, Thomas Avery. Cheryl reviewed each line, cross-checked the signatures, and confirmed that the changes had already taken effect. We froze all large withdrawals on every shared account. Set alerts. Labeled every important file with my legal initials and date stamps. Nothing could move without my written consent. It was quiet, clinical, and left no room for confusion. That afternoon, I met Linda at her office. She had already prepared a formal cease and desist letter addressed to Nathan and Jessica. It stated that any further attempt to secure guardianship or modify financial authority would be seen as legal harassment. The letter was short, firm, and would be delivered by courier within the hour. I gave her a separate envelope. Inside was a flash drive with audio clips, timestampet logs, and a summary of the past 3 weeks. She placed it in a fireproof lockbox without asking questions. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes told me she had seen this before. Later, I met with Sharon, Linda's colleague in elder law and advocacy. Sharon had a sharp mind and a voice like steel wrapped in silk. We sat in a diner booth near the window. The kind of place where no one looked twice at a woman holding a file folder and a quiet stare. I handed her everything. A second flash drive. Copies of the trust revisions. My handwritten timeline. She reviewed them one by one. Then opened a slim laptop and began typing. She was drafting a press release. Just in case. Not to go public yet. But to prepare. To leave no crack for doubt if things turned. That night, I placed one final envelope on the fireplace mantel. Plain white. Sealed. Inside was a notarized affidavit from Sharon, listing every documented incident, every statement, and every timestamp. If Nathan or Jessica opened it, they'd know the truth was no longer theirs to manage. I wasn't planning to shame them. I wasn't looking to destroy what was left of my family. I just wanted peace. I wanted safety. And I wanted the truth to have a place, even if no one else wanted to hear it. Some women fight with noise. I was learning how to fight with clarity, and it was working. It happened just after dinner. I was folding towels in the laundry room when I heard the sound of papers being shuffled. Then a sharp rustle, followed by footsteps too fast to be casual. Jessica burst in first, holding the envelope from the mantel, torn and crumpled in her hand. Her face tight with rage. She didn't scream, but her voice carried the kind of fury that doesn't need volume. She asked if I thought I was clever, if I believed this would scare them off. I didn't answer. I just folded the last towel and set it on the stack. Nathan came in behind her. Slower. Quieter. His shoulders were curled inward. Hands in his pockets. Eyes low. He looked like a man who had just seen a blueprint for something he helped design and realized he no longer recognized it. Jessica kept going. Accusing. Pacing. Waving the documents like they were some kind of betrayal. She said none of it would matter. That I couldn't undo what they'd already started. Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked at her for a long moment. Then turned to Nathan. He finally looked up. Our eyes met. And for a split second, the distance between us felt older than either of us could name. He said it softly. You were never going to give it to us. Not the house. Not the money. You always planned to cut us out. I stepped forward. Slow and even. I said no. I never planned to cut you out. I just stopped pretending you were the kind of people I could trust with what mattered most. Jessica scoffed and walked out. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway like a closing door. Nathan stayed. He didn't speak again. He just stood there, staring at the floor like he couldn't decide who he had become. I walked past him, back to the living room, and picked up a framed photo from the shelf. It was 10 years old. All of us smiling in the backyard. I brushed my thumb over the glass and whispered to no one in particular that I never forgot them. But somewhere along the way, I think I forgot myself. Nathan didn't follow. He sat on the arm of the couch, staring into nothing. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy. The kind that settles into the walls and stays long after the people are gone. That night, the house didn't feel tense. It felt empty, not hollow, just still. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid. I felt finished, not with the fight, but with the pretending. A week after the confrontation, the house was quiet in a different way. Not the silence of tension or pretending, but something softer, like the kind of stillness that follows a long storm. Nathan didn't leave a note. There was no apology, no last-ditch effort to explain. Just an emptied closet and a front door that didn't close all the way behind him. Jessica was gone before him. She took most of her things, left a few mugs in the dishwasher and a faint trace of her perfume in the hallway. I didn't bother scrubbing it out. I figured time would do that on its own. I moved room by room, touching everything they'd tried to turn into theirs. I opened the blinds, aired out the bedrooms, rearranged the bookshelves. Nothing dramatic. Just little restorations. Quiet ways of saying this is still mine. There was no joy in their absence. No victory. Just relief. The kind that sits deep in your chest and makes it easier to breathe again. I spent one morning walking the garden, pruning the roses, adjusting the irrigation lines that had been clogged for weeks. I found a small notebook buried under a pile of mail. It had Henry's handwriting on the cover. Just a grocery list from years ago. I kept it. The fund was officially active now. The paperwork had cleared. The Ellsworth Fund for Elder Justice would begin its first round of training next month. 3 young women from the local university were coming by to learn about the outreach program. I didn't tell them everything, but I told them enough. There's a different kind of power in choosing what you do with your pain. Some people pass it on. Some bury it so deep they forget it ever happened. I built something with mine. Not to punish. Just to protect. I wasn't angry anymore. Not the way I thought I'd be. What Nathan and Jessica did hurt. But I'd already started to understand that the hurt didn't have to define the rest of my story. Now, each morning, I sit on the porch with a cup of coffee and let the breeze come through the oaks. The light hits the kitchen just right. And the floor creaks in the same spots. It always has. I take comfort in that. This house doesn't just feel like mine again. It feels like me. A little worn. A little weathered. But still standing. Still warm. Still here. And when I catch my reflection in the window, I don't see a woman who lost her family. I see a woman who remembered herself just in time. I used to think justice had to be loud to matter. That it came with gavel strikes or shouting or slammed doors. But now I know it can arrive in quiet steps. In documents signed behind closed doors. In stories passed from one hand to another. The hardest part wasn't catching them. It was choosing not to let their betrayal change who I am. I could have screamed. Exposed. Punished. But instead, I protected. Rebuilt. And chose peace over vengeance. If you're watching this and you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or used by the people closest to you, I want you to know you are not alone. Your clarity matters. Even if others try to make you question it, there is strength in remembering who you are. Even when the world wants you to forget. I didn't win with force. I won by stepping fully into my own truth and refusing to let anyone write my ending for me. And you can too. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You just need to stop pretending and start choosing yourself. So if this story stayed with you, tell someone. Leave a comment. Share your thoughts. Or maybe just carry it with you into whatever comes next. Because your voice matters. Your story matters. And somewhere, another woman is sitting in silence, waiting for permission to begin again. Maybe hearing this will be her first step. Maybe this time, it starts with you.